The town of Greywick sat where the forest began, as if the trees had slowly crept forward over the years and the town had chosen not to run. Roads twisted unnaturally, bending around thick trunks and exposed roots, refusing to follow straight lines. From above, the place looked almost accidental, like it had been dropped into the woods rather than built there. Sunlight rarely reached the ground in full. Even on clear days, the canopy filtered the light into dull patches and long shadows that stretched across porches and sidewalks. People learned to live without brightness. Lamps were kept close. Windows were rarely uncovered after dusk. Power outages were common enough that no one complained anymore. Generators hummed behind houses. Lanterns hung by doors. Candles were bought in bulk. The darkness wasn't feared at first, just expected. Outsiders called it quaint. Locals called it normal. But no one ever called it comfortable. There was a feeling that lingered in Greywick, subtle enough to ignore during the day, but heavy once night fell. A sense of being watched, not closely, not urgently, just patiently, as if something beyond the tree line was aware of the town and had all the time in the world. The older residents spoke in fragments, half-finished sentences, warnings disguised as jokes. Don't wander after dark. Lights on, always. The forest listens. No one could ever explain what that last one meant. The first real sign that something was wrong came on a quiet evening at the diner. The building sat at the center of town, a low brick structure with flickering fluorescent lights and cracked vinyl booths. It was the one place that stayed open late, the one place people gathered when they didn't want to be alone with their thoughts. Just before closing, the door creaked open. A farmer stepped inside. His boots were heavy with mud, leaving dark prints across the tile. His jacket was unzipped, despite the cold, and his hands shook as if he hadn't realized yet that he was indoors. The bell above the door rang, sharp and hollow, but no one looked up at first. He didn't order food, didn't greet anyone, didn't even sit down. He walked straight to the counter and set something down, a photograph. The teenager working the register glanced at it without much interest at first, then froze. The image showed a pile of bones. They were pale, unnaturally clean, arranged in a loose spiral on the forest floor. No beats of hide, no traces of decay. The ground around them was dark, wet, almost reflective, as if stained by oil rather than blood. The farmer finally spoke. "I found it behind my barn." His voice was low, tight, like he was afraid the walls might hear him. A man at the counter chuckled nervously. "Coyotes do weird things." The farmer shook his head slowly. "Coyotes don't do this," he said. "They don't clean bones, and they don't leave the ground like that." Someone else leaned closer, squinting at the photo. "Where are the tracks?" "There aren't any," the farmer replied. Silence settled over the diner. The photograph passed from hand to hand. Each person held it a little farther away than the last, as if distance might make it safer. A few people muttered explanations. Predators, scavengers, pranksters, but none of them sounded convinced. Eventually, someone mentioned the forest. Not loudly, just enough. The old stories resurfaced the way they always did, indirectly. Tales about shapes that moved between trees. About things that learned paths and waited. About why the woods were never logged past a certain point. The teenager behind the counter listened, his skin prickling. He had grown up hearing those stories, usually told with a laugh or a shrug, but seeing the photograph made them feel heavier, more real. When his shift ended, he couldn't get the image out of his head. He met his friends at the bowling alley, where the smell of fried food mixed with the thud of rolling balls and the low hum of old music. It should have been comforting, familiar. Instead, he'd felt the blade run. He told them about the farmer, about the photograph, about the bones. They laughed at first. Nervous laughter, the kind people use when they want something to be untrue. Then one of them suggested they go look who's to be Suri. The teenager hesitated. Something about the idea felt like stepping over a line you couldn't see. But curiosity is louder than caution, especially when fear hasn't learned how to speak yet. They went just after midnight. The moon was full, bright enough to cast silver light across the fields. The barn stood at the edge of the property, its wooden frame warped with age, boards sagging like tired shoulders. It looked abandoned, forgotten. They climbed the fence and crossed the field, boots crunching softly against frostbitten grass. One of them carried a flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. They didn't have to search long. The bones were there, exactly as the photograph had shown. Seeing them in person was different. The air around the pile felt wrong. Thick, metallic, sharp. The ground glistened faintly, reflecting the moonlight in a way dirt shouldn't. No one spoke. The flashlight flickered. "Don't mess with it," someone whispered. "I'm not." The boy holding the light replied. The beam sputtered again, dimming, brightening, then cutting out entirely. Darkness closed around them. It wasn't the normal kind. Not the gentle absence of light. This felt heavy, pressing inward, swallowing sound. They stood close together, breathing too loudly. Then came the sound, a slow, wet drag, like something being pulled across old wood. It came from inside the barn. Someone shifted, and something cold brushed against their ankle. They screamed. The darkness moved. Not rushed. Not chauti. It flowed, spilling from the corners of the barn like thick liquid, stretching toward them in unnatural shapes. One of the group was yanked backward, their cry cut short. The sound that followed wasn't something the others would ever forget. They ran, blindly, desperately. One of them tripped. Another vanished into the dark without a sound. The flashlight remained dead, useless in shaking hands. Only one made it back. He burst into town barefoot, wide-eyed, voice breaking as he tried to explain. He spoke of shadows that grabbed, of something that moved without form, of a barn that swallowed people whole. Most didn't believe him, but the forest listened, and the lights went out. The power didn't they come back on. At first, people treated it like any other outage. Greywick was used to darkness. Generators were dragged out of sheds. Candles appeared in windows. Radios crackled with static as residents tried to catch updates from outside towns. But by morning, something felt wrong. The usual background hum, the distant whine of electricity. The quiet reassurance of working lines was gone. Not just absent, but replaced by something else. A thick stillness that pressed against the town from all sides. Phones had no signal. Landlines were dead. Even battery-powered radios picked up nothing but hiss. Greywick was alone. The boy who had run back from the barn, his name was Caleb, sat, wrapped in a blanket at the clinic, rocking slightly as a nurse checked him for injuries. He had cuts on his feet, splinters in his palms, and a bruise around his wrist shaped like fingers that were just a little too long. He kept repeating the same sentence. It knew where we were. Sheriff Halvorsen arrived just after sunrise. He was a tall man with tired eyes, and a voice that usually made people feel safe simply by hearing it. He listened carefully as Caleb spoke, never interrupting, never dismissing. But the story made his jaw tighten. Shadows that moved on their own, a darkness that reached, a sound like wet fabric dragging across wood. When Caleb finished, the room felt colder. "Where are the others?" the sheriff asked gently. Caleb swallowed. It took them. That was when the search began. They went out in pairs, then groups. Flashlights, rifles, radios that didn't work. The forest edge loomed closer than it ever had before, its trees packed tightly together, branches interwoven like locked fingers. The barn stood exactly where it should have been. Too exactly. No broken boards, no disturbed soil, no footprints leading away. The pile of bones was gone. In its place was bare ground, dry, ordinary dirt, as if nothing had ever been there at all. Someone laughed nervously. "See? Kids got scared. Probably animals dragged the rest away." No one agreed out loud. The sheriff stepped into the barn. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of old hay and something faintly sour. Light filtered through gaps in the boards, forming thin lines across the floor. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then he noticed the silence. No insects, no birds, no wind. Even their breathing sounded muffled, like the barn was swallowing noise. "Mark this place," the sheriff said quietly. We'll come back with more people. They never did. By noon, the first disappearance was reported. An elderly woman named Ruth Calder hadn't shown up for her daily walk. Her house was unlocked. Her tea sat untouched on the table, still warm. Her coat was missing. Searchers followed her usual path to the edge of the woods. They found her shoes, placed neatly side by side, no tracks leading away. By evening, 2 more people were gone. A mechanic who stayed late at his shop, a teenager who stepped outside to smoke. Panic spread fast after that. People barricaded doors. Families slept in the same rooms. Fires burned through the night. Someone tried to drive out of town, only to return an hour later, shaking and pale. The road loops, he said. I kept driving. Same trees, same bend, over and over. That was when the town council gathered in the school gym, lit by lanterns and emergency lights. Voices echoed off the walls as arguments broke out. We need to leave. We need help. This is superstition. An old woman stood up near the back. Her hair was white, air bike bent, but her voice carried. You didn't listen, she said. Silence followed. My grandfather warned us, she continued. Said the forest doesn't hunt all the time. It waits. And when it's hungry, it takes quietly. Someone scoffed. So what? The woods are alive now. The woman met his eyes. No. Something in them is. That night, the fog rolled in. It crept low along the ground, thick and pale, muffling sound and swallowing distance. Streetlights, those still powered by generators, glowed dimly, their light barely piercing the haze. Inside one house, a man named Peter sat by his window with a shotgun across his lap. He watched the fog curl around his fence, his heart pounding with every imagined movement. Then he saw Italiano, a shape barely darker than the mist, standing just beyond the yard. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Peter raised the gun, hands shaking. Get out of here, he whispered. The shape tilted, not like a head turning more. Like the idea of attention shifting toward him, the window frost bloomed outward in a sudden pattern, spiderwebbing across the glass. Peter fired. The sound was swallowed instantly. When neighbors came running, the house was empty. The window was open. The fog had already moved on. By morning, Greywick had learned the truth. Whatever was taking them wasn't chasing. It wasn't attacking randomly. It was waiting. And it knew exactly who was awake. By the 3rd day without power, Greywick stopped pretending this was temporary. The generators ran low. Fuel became precious. Lights were rationed to a few buildings: the clinic, the sheriff's office, the school gym. Everywhere else sank into shadow as night fell. And the disappearances followed a pattern. At first, no one wanted to say it out loud. People don't like patterns when they're afraid of what those patterns mean. But Sheriff Halvorsen noticed. He wrote names on a chalkboard in his office, marking the time, the place, the conditions. Every missing person had been alone. Every one of them had been awake, and every one of them had been surrounded by darkness. Those who stayed together survived. Those who slept survived. Those who sat quietly in dim rooms survived. Those who watched the dark, who waited, listened, or stayed, alerted not. It was as if something moved only when it was noticed. The sheriff didn't share this theory right away, not because he doubted it, but because he understood what fear does to people. Tell them the wrong thing, and panic spreads faster than any creature ever could. Still, rumors traveled. They say it only comes when you're watching. They say if you stay silent, it passes. They say it hates light. No one knew which parts were true, but everyone obeyed them anyway. At night, Greywick became a town holding its breath. Families crowded into single rooms, candles burned low, covered with glass to soften the glow. Children were told stories not to entertain them, but to keep them from listening too closely to the quiet, because the quiet had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt intentional. A woman named Maribel noticed it first. She had lived alone since her husband died, always awake late, always listening to the radio as she knitted by lamplight. On the 4th night, the radio went silent, mid-song. Not static, Not interference. Silence. She tapped it, adjusted the dial. Nothing. Then she heard something outside her door. Not footsteps. Pressure. Like someone leaning close, testing the space. Maribel froze. She remembered the rumors. Remembered the rules she'd heard whispered at the gym. Don't look. Don't speak. Don't react. The pressure shifted. Her lamp flickered. She closed her eyes and stayed still, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it could be heard. Minutes passed, then hours. When morning came, her house still stood. Her door was untouched. Across the street, however, her neighbor's home was empty. The neighbor had been a man who couldn't sleep, a man who sat by his window all night, watching the fog. That same morning, Sheriff Halvorsen finally spoke at the gym. "What we're dealing with," he said slowly, "is not random." A murmur rippled through the crowd. It doesn't break in. It doesn't chase. It waits for attention. Someone shouted, "So what? We just ignore it." The sheriff nodded. Yes. That answer terrified them more than any monster could have. "You're saying it's still out there?" "Yes. And that it's watching us?" "Yes." Silence fell. Then a voice from the back. "Why us?" No one answered. The old woman, Mrs. Ione, the one who had spoken before, stood again, leaning on her cane. "Because this town was built too close," she said, "and because we forgot the old warnings." She told them the story. Then, long before Greywick had a name, the forest had been avoided. Hunters marked its edge with symbols and never crossed them after dark. They believed something lived where the light thinned a presence that fed on awareness itself. "It doesn't want bodies," she said. "It wants attention. Fear. Focus. Recognition," someone whispered, "like a shadow that only exists if you stare at it." Mrs. Ione nodded. "Exactly." The sheriff felt a chill crawl up his spine. That night, the rule was made official. No one stays awake alone after dark. No uncovered lights near windows. No watching the forest. They called it the quiet rule. For a while, it worked. 2 nights passed without a disappearance. People dared to hope. That was when the knocking started, soft and fierce. 3 slow taps. Always from somewhere just out of sight. Doors. Walls. Windows. Never loud enough to be threatening. Never close enough to confirm. Just enough to make people listen. The first person to break the rule was a man named Owen Pike. He heard the knocking on his back wall and decided he'd had enough. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, he stepped outside. His wife begged him not to. "I just want to see what it is," he said. "I'll be right back." The beam of his flashlight cut into the fog. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the light caught something that shouldn't have been there. Not a body. A shape, like darkness, folding around itself. The light flickered. Owen screamed once. By the time the sheriff arrived, the flashlight lay on the ground, still glowing weakly. Owen was gone. After that, no one argued with the rules. But something had changed. The creature or presence, or whatever it was, had learned. It stopped knocking. It stopped testing doors. Instead, it waited for mistakes. A candle left uncovered. A child peeking through a curtain. A guard falling asleep at his post. One by one, Greywick grew smaller. The sheriff's board filled with names. And then, one evening, a name appeared that made his hands shake. His daughter's. Emily Halvorsen, 16. Restless. Too brave for her own good. She had volunteered to help at the clinic that night. When he arrived, the building was dark. Too dark. Inside, the lanterns were unlit. Beds were empty. The air was cold. And on the wall, scratched into the paint, were words that hadn't been there before. Not Garbeth. Not written. Pressed. IT sees you when you watch back. The sheriff stood alone in the clinic, understanding at last. This wasn't an attack. It was a lesson, and Greywick was running out of time. Sheriff Halvorsen did not scream. He did not run. He stood in the empty clinic, staring at his daughter's name on the board in his mind, at the message pressed into the wall like the paint itself had been soft and shaped by invisible hands. It's easy when you watch back. Emily was gone. No sound of struggle. No signs of a fight. Just absence. The sheriff understood something, then something that made his chest feel hollow. This thing didn't hunt people. It educated them. Every disappearance refined the rules. Every mistake taught it more. Greywick wasn't under attack. It was being studied. By morning, the town had lost nearly a third of its population. The gym was quieter now. Fewer arguments. Less hope. The remaining people moved carefully, spoke softly, avoided windows entirely. But fear has weight, and the longer it sits, the harder it is to carry. Sheriff Halvorsen gathered the survivors and told them the truth. All the rules we've made, he said. They don't stop it. They delay it. Someone asked the question no one wanted to voice. So, what does it want? He looked toward the forest, visible through the gym doors as a wall of gray and shadow. To be acknowledged, he said, just once. Fully. Mrs. Ione nodded slowly. That's what the old stories said, that if it was ever truly seen, it would stop waiting. A man whispered, and whoever sees it. The sheriff didn't answer. That night, he made his decision. He left a note on the chalkboard. Keep the lights low. Stay together. Don't follow me. He walked alone toward the forest. The fog parted for him. Not dramatically, not violently, like it had been expecting him. The trees swallowed sound as he stepped past the old boundary markers, symbols no one remembered how to read anymore. The deeper he went, the heavier the air became. Thick with that same pressure people had felt at their doors, then eso italiano. Not standing, not moving, just there, a shape where the darkness folded wrong, where depth collapsed inward. It did not have eyes, but he knew absolutely that it was aware of him. For the first time, someone did not look away. I see you, the sheriff said. The forest exhaled, the pressure vanished. The fog lifted. Morning came to Greywick quietly. No one disappeared that night. Power returned by afternoon. Ponis worked. Roads led where they were supposed to. The forest looked like trees again, ordinary, harmless. They found the sheriff's badge at the forest edge. Nothing else. Greywick never rebuilt near the woods. No houses, no trails, no curiosity. People who lived there learned a final lesson, passed down in careful words. Some things don't want to hurt you. They want to be noticed, and the most dangerous thing you can give them is your attention. The forest still stands, and sometimes, when the lights go out in towns nearby, people swear the darkness feels closer than it should.